So hi, welcome everyone to Finding Diverse Books for Kids. I'm Barrett Miller. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at the Oregon City Public Library. You'll see teens and another name on here. We are doing a presentation for the middle and high school teachers as well, and to make sure you are all getting the same information, we're giving you both the same presentation, so it'll have our information on here too. I wanted to point out the link on the screen to the library's website. The presentation and all of our book lists will be made available on that web page. So make sure to make note of that link. Everything we're sharing today will be downloadable and clickable and accessible through there. All right. I also like to start by going over the agenda for the day so everybody knows what to expect. We will have a quick reflection activity for those of us who are joining live. Then we will talk a little bit about diversity in children's books generally, some common terms, and a couple tools you can use to evaluate diverse books. Then we'll get into the heart of our presentation, which is talking about different identities, how to find those books in the library, and some recommendations of my favorite books from 2020. And then we'll also go over just real quick some of the basics on how to search for books, how to place hold, what sort of services the library has during these delightful COVID times. And then at the end, there will be some Q&A as well. As we're going, if you have questions, just pop those in the chat box. And Lisa, if there's anything that we should address quickly before I move on, Lisa will let me know. Anything else we'll save to the end so that we can talk about more specifics with just the live group today. Okay, so we're going to start by talking just about a couple of sort of broad terms and concepts that people will use when they're talking about diverse books for kids. In the past, I used to talk about statistics a lot because I like numbers and I'm a nerd, but that information is not super relevant to classroom teachers in the short term and meeting your immediate needs for this. So I have some resources on statistics that I'll share later in the presentation, but for now, so stay tuned for those and we'll get to them then, but for now I'm going to focus on some of the bigger concepts. So the first one that you may come across is mirror books and window books. And this comes from an essay by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, where she uses this really lovely metaphor to help us think about the different ways that people connect to and relate to books. So she says, books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through an imagination to become part of whatever world has just been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So mirrors and windows is a great tool to use and with any book that you're sharing with your students, just as a quick reflection to be like, all right, how is this book a mirror for my students and how is this book a window? And that's going to be different for every single kid for the most part. Another metaphor I hear around windows and mirror books that I like is sort of the balanced diet metaphor, is that everybody should have a nice book mix of mirrors and windows in their reading. And so having this as sort of a regular check-in question you ask yourself can be a really good way to kind of assess and just keep paying attention to what you're using in your classroom to see, all right, am I getting a good balance of windows and mirrors for everyone in my classroom? Another term you'll hear a lot is own voices. You'll see it in book reviews or even in book descriptions and a lot on social media as a hashtag. It was originally a Twitter hashtag created by a YA author in 2015. And basically what it means is that own voices means that if you are writing a main character who's part of a marginalized group, you are part of that marginalized group as well. I really like this definition from Blue Crow Publishing because it's really precise and succinct. And they also have a quote from an author named Kayla Whaley, who explains why own voices is important for representation. And I'm just going to quote her because she says it better than I ever could. Time and again, marginalized people have seen their stories taken from them, misused, and published as authentic, while marginalized authors have had to jump hurdle after hurdle to be published themselves. Many feel they must fight to receive even a fraction of the pay, promotion, and praise that outsiders get for writing diverse characters' stories, and that's when they're allowed in the door at all. Even when portrayals of diverse characters by majority group authors are respectfully and accurately done, there's an extra degree of nuance and authority that comes with writing from lived experience. Those books that are hashtag own voices have an added richness to them precisely because the author shares an identity with the character. The author has the deepest possible understanding of the intricacies, the joys, the difficulties, the pride, the frustration, and every other possible facet of that particular life because the author has actually lived it. So that's why own voices is something really important to be paying attention to when you're looking at diverse books. I do want to say it's also fairly complex and nuanced. It's not necessarily a super easy cut and dry thing because identity is nuanced and complicated. I've linked to a discussion of the original FAQ from the original hashtag that kind of breaks down some of the ways that it is that identity and intersectional identities in particular can be complicated. And then I also wanted to note that sometimes identities are invisible. And so you can't always tell by an author's name or their photo whether or not that their book is an own voices story. And sometimes you can find more information by doing a little bit of research, and sometimes you just don't know. Which kind of brings us to what do you do when you have a diverse book, but it's not by an own voice. It's not an own voices story, or it is not, or you can't tell whether it's own voices. And Jacqueline Woodson, who is Black author who has written multiple award-winning books, she wrote a really excellent essay called Who Can Tell My Story, where she really explores this concept. And the conclusion that she offers is this: my belief is that there is room in the world for all stories and that everyone has one. My hope is that those who write about the tears and the laughter and the language in my grandmother's house have first sat down at the table with us and dipped the bread of their own experiences into our stew. So when it comes to books, the easiest way to find out whether or not the author has sat down at the table, metaphorically speaking, is to look for the author's notes. This is where they will talk about what sort of research they did, what books did they read, who did they talk to. All of that information will be in an author's notes, generally speaking. If you have a book that is a diverse book and you can't tell whether it's an own voices book and there's no author's note, that's a red flag that there may be, that author may have not done their due diligence. So it's worth either pausing, doing some additional research, kind of following up to figure out more about how the book was written and who is telling the story. Luckily, this is not nearly as much of a problem as it used to be. Most books are really great about identifying themselves as being own voices or having a really detailed author's note. And I do have a couple of examples that I'll point out when I get to the book part of the presentation. So if any of you are curious for what that looks like, I have a couple of examples of how it's done really well that you can then go look at. All right, Lisa, any questions that I should address before I move forward? Are we doing okay?
We're doing great.
Perfect. All right, so now we're going to get into the nitty gritty, talking about some different identities, how to find those books, and some book recommendations. To get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview and talk about a couple terminology things that we'll want to be familiar with before we move forward. So we're going to have book suggestions for each of these categories. The book covers are in the slides and they will be clickable and take you to the library catalog so you can learn more or place them on hold. I've also got a little key of graphics for different types of formats, and this gives you definitions for what all of that, those little symbols mean. In the purple box for awards, if there is a book award for books featuring protagonists or written by authors from a specific identity, I'll link to that award list. And then the pink box will always have a link to a list of the books about that identity that Oregon City Public Library purchased in 2020. And if there are any other really good online resources I want you to know about, I will link to those there as well. Quick note about the terms I used to describe different identities. Most of the time, the language was pretty straightforward, and I could pick a term that seemed pretty universal, pretty universally used, but there were a couple where I wasn't totally sure which one to go with. And in that case, I used the language that librarians of that identity use to identify their professional organization. because these organizations are the ones who do book awards. So I went with that language because it matches the book award and allows some consistency within this particular context. The other terminology note is kind of tied to the green box of subject headings. So pretty much every library in the United States uses what are called Library of Congress subject headings. And this is like a master list of approved terms we can use to describe like the subject matter or the contents of a book. There are a lot of benefits to this system. It means that any library you go to in the United States will use the same terminology. And it means that there's some sort of behind the scenes technical resources that Library of Congress staff create that can then be used at every library in the country. And so it has a lot of positive aspects. That said, there are some downsides. This list is managed by the Library of Congress, and I believe that changes to it actually require congressional approval. So what this means is that individual libraries have no control over, we can choose which terms from the book we want to use, or from the master list that we want to use, but we can't modify them, or if there's a term that's not in that master list, we can't use it in our online search system. And because the change process is fairly convoluted, the terminology does not change as often as spoken language does. So often the terms in that master list will be outdated. So one of my examples that I always use is that they did not transition from cookery to cookbooks until 2010, which, you know, when it's something fairly neutral like that, it's awkward, but it's not problematic. When you're talking about identities and however, like outdated terminology can actually be, you know, offensive or harmful. And unfortunately, some of the terminology that we have to choose from is not what we would be using colloquially speaking. It is not considered terminology that would be respectful to use necessarily with another person, and many people of that identity would not use that terminology. However, it is what it is. It's what we have to work with. I like to see if people notice that it's coming, so that they can just be prepared that the terminology they encounter here might not be what they are expecting, and to let you know that if we had the power to change it, we totally would. But unfortunately, because it's a bigger system, we are like, I do not have the power to change what that says in our catalog, and neither does anybody else locally. So it's not done intentionally. We're doing the best we can in a problematic system, looking at better solutions, but they do take time to implement. And we're going to go ahead and dive into our first category, citizenship status. And this is one where the available terminology is not terminology that we would generally use when speaking to generally use in speech, given our current given the terminology that's currently considered appropriate and respectful. So those blue links in the green box are all linked to the library catalog, so that will take you to all of the books that are tagged with those subject headings. So you can search generally for immigrants, or you can be more specific for looking at refugees or undocumented immigrants using outdated terminology. And then I have some books to talk about with you. So my choice for the picture book, which is great for our kindergarten through second grade readers, is A New Kind of Wild by Zara Gonzalez Wang. And it is not an own voices book, but it is based on stories her father told her about his childhood in Puerto Rico. And so it's about a little boy who lives on the edge of El Yunque, which is the rainforest, until his family has to move to the city. And he doesn't like the city. He misses all of the noises and the colors of the rainforest until he meets another girl who lives in his building, and she loves the city and the people and the noises and all of the wonderful things that, you know, she sees when she looks out his window. And she tries to show him how great the city is, but it really doesn't work very well until she actually sits down and he tells her what he misses so much about the rainforest, and then she helps him figure out how to find those same things in the city. So it's a good story because it reflects that an experience that is specific to you know, immigration in many ways, but it's got a lot of more broader themes about change and transitions and mindsets and imagination that allows it to be both a mirror book and a window book for a lot of kids. And then my 3rd through 5th grade pick is called The Wonder of Wildflowers by Anna Staniszewski. And it is a fantasy novel about a place called Amberland, where everyone who lives there has access to this magical, or everyone who's born there or becomes a citizen has access to this magical substance that makes them super strong and sort of special. And it's about a girl named Mira whose family are immigrants, and they're just about to get their citizenship, and she'll be able to take Amber and just like everyone else. She gets paired for a class project with another immigrant kid in her class who she tries not to, she always tries to kind of keep them separate because she doesn't want to be seen as different in the way that he is different. And she learns that there's a scarcity of this magical substance, and that there are people, they're running out of it, and there are people who really need it who are sick, who aren't going to get it. And she has to kind of decide whether she wants to, take it and be just like everybody else, or, if she needs to stand up for the rules changing and it being used to help the people who need it. And the author is an immigrant from Poland who she wrote a really lovely author's note about people were always asking her to write realistic fiction about her experience of being an immigrant, and it just never felt right to her because she always loved fantasy books. But she finally found this idea and found a way to use her love of fantasy to tell this story that was very much her own experience, but done in this magical way that more matched her voice as a writer. So most stories in this category tend to be realistic fiction, so it's always nice to have a fantasy option. All right, any questions, Lisa? Or are we still doing okay?
We're totally great.
Perfect. All right, next category I have up is disability. This is one in that green box. People with disabilities was the term, the phrase that was getting me the best results, but it's good to know that this isn't always super consistently applied. So sometimes the term that will be in our system is just people with disabilities. Sometimes it will be people with disabilities and the type of disability, so blindness, or it might just be the type of disability. So if you're looking for anything in particular, it's good to try experimenting with a couple of different terms because there's not necessarily standard practices around applying both terms. It's just kind of up to whoever creates that. Whoever applies the terms will sometimes pick one, sometimes both, sometimes the other. So it's good to know that you may have to do a couple different searches. My choice for the picture book is All the Way to the Top: How One Girl's Fight for Americans with Disabilities Changed Everything. This is, again, not an Own Voices book. However, it's a biography, and Jennifer Keelan, who's the subject of the biography, actually has an introduction in the book where she writes a letter to all of the readers, so her perspective is included. And so Jennifer was 8 in 1990 when the ADA was passed, and before that, she hadn't been allowed to attend school because her school had no wheelchair ramps, and there were she was experiencing a lot of those structural barriers that were in place, and there was no legal framework to address prior to the ADA. And so she became involved in a variety of protest movements, including the Capitol Crawl, which the ADA was in Congress. It was not going to have enough votes to pass. And so this group of activists came to the Capitol. There was no wheelchair ramp, no way to get in. So they got out of their wheelchairs and they climbed the steps. And she was 8 years old, and she decided she was going to do the protest too. It made international news. ADA was passed. It's like this huge moment in disability history. And so it's telling Jennifer's story from her childhood to deciding to climb the steps. It's got some really excellent author's notes with a ton of information about disabilities in general and the ADA in particular. And it does a really good job of balancing all the progress that the activists made with the Capitol Crawl and the ADA and the changes that began, while also acknowledging that the changes, there's still a lot of work to be done. So it's a really great story from a variety of perspectives. And there's also some really nice themes and some specific stuff pulled out in the book about, how you can be an activist as a kid and how you still, you have power and you can change the world and your voice matters, which is a thing I think a lot of people in our community we're really thinking about and talking about in our classrooms and at home. So it's very, very timely and relevant. And then my pick for the older kids is Normal: One Kid's Extraordinary Journey by Magdalena and Nathaniel Newman. So Nathaniel has Treacher-Collins syndrome, which is a craniofacial condition, and it's the medical condition that Augie, the protagonist in Wonder by R.J. Palacio, has. But this is a memoir telling his story from his perspective. And so it's a really nice kind of complement to Wonder. my requests for Wonder were starting to go down. I don't know if it's quite as popular as it was like 2 or 3 years ago, but I know a lot of kids really love that book. And this is a nice one to hand them as a way to build off of Wonder, which is a work of fiction by somebody who does not have Treacher Collins, to give them kind of an own voices take on, someone's perspective from what it's like for their experiences living with this medical condition. And it's got some really fun, like sort of black and white cartoon illustrations, and it's mostly told from Nathaniel's point of view, but there's some sections that his mom will put into, and it's a really, really interesting memoir and a great sort of companion to Wonder. All right, Lisa, anything from that one that we needed to follow up on, or are we still okay?
Still good.
Perfect. All right, so next up we have gender identity and sexuality. This one is a lot like disability in that the most general and broad terms are not always consistently applied. So if you're looking specifically for books, say about transgender kids, you may want to put in just transgender and see what comes up. Because sometimes you have, the general terms and the specific one, and sometimes you just have the specific one. So my picture book choice is Call Me Max by Kyle Lukoff. This is an own voices picture book about being a trans boy. And it's really great because it's all told from Max's point of view, sort of like a biography of, sort of birth up to, maybe like kindergarten or first grade. And there's a lot of details in it. It's got a narrative structure to it, and there's a lot of details in there that will definitely function as mirrors for trans kids. But the way it's written is done to also have it function really well to just explain it, like to within the text answer a lot of questions that children in particular, but I think not all, but many adults also have about what it means to be transgender. So it kind of explains, what does it mean to be transgender? Why don't I want to tell you what my name was before I decided I wanted to be called Max? Difficulties around like which bathroom do I use and things like that. So it's the author also does a really good job of sort of differentiating what it means to be a girl versus what it means to be a boy, and how you can be a girl who likes spiders or a boy who likes dresses, and that's not necessarily like you can be those things and not be transgender as well. So it's really great. It works really well on multiple levels. My choice for the older readers is The Derby Daredevils, Kenzie Kickstarts a Team by Kit Rosewater. This is another own voices book, and it is about roller derby. So if you have any kids who really love Roller Girl by Victoria Jameson, this is a great one to hand them. It's not a graphic novel, but it does have a ton of illustrations. And it's about a pair of fifth graders, Kenzie and her best friend Shelly, who are obsessed with roller derby. They are literally counting the days. It's like 1,000 something till they can join the teen roller derby league in their town. Until they find out that there's going to be a kids roller derby league starting this year. They're old enough to join, and then they read the fine print, which is you have to try out as an individual or as a team. They can't try out as a pair, and so they have to try and recruit enough other girls to be on their team. So they're trying to find, they've got like a week to get together this derby team and trying to find girls who've got, the interest and the skills to be good derby skaters. And it gets complicated by the fact that Kenzie has her first crush on one of the girls that Shelly is trying to recruit to the team, and she hasn't told Shelly about this yet. And so it's kind of causing some tension because she's upset with Shelly for kind of interfering, but she's also still, sort of still trying to figure out how to talk to Shelly about this. And another nice detail is that Kenzie's dad is trans as well. So there's several different angles there. This is one of the ones that I actually was able to read all the way through, and it was really good. It's so much fun, tons of details about roller derby, but also just a lot about friendship. So I think it will appeal to a lot of our 4th and 5th grade readers for sure. All right, next up on my list is Income Inequality. This is one that's a little bit tricky to find books for because often there's not, it will be kind of integrated into the story, but not, mentioned in detail in the book description or anywhere else. So sometimes these books can kind of fly under the radar a little bit. I have a couple of different types of terminology, subject terms to try clicking. You can generally find books about homelessness a little bit more easily than you can just about about income inequality or poverty, which is kind of frustrating because in terms of, our local community, we know that while we might not be as racially diverse as other communities in the state or in the country, that we definitely, there's quite a range of income levels and the difficulties that come with that. So my choice for the second graders was, or the kindergarten through second graders, is The Blue House by Phoebe Wall. And this is a book about a boy and his dad who live in, they love the blue house they live in, even though the heat doesn't always work and the paint is peeling and it's not in the greatest shape. It's their home, it's where they have their dance parties, it's where they bake pies in the winter. But they notice that the other houses in their neighborhood are slowly getting torn down to build new apartment buildings, and their landlord decides to sell the house and they have to find a new place to live. And they find a new house, but it's not the same, and they have, it's a hard transition, and it's hard to go back to their old neighborhood and see the house getting knocked down and replaced. And it's about how they find a way to make the new house feel like a home. This will be a theme in several of the books I picked. I found that I was finding a lot of books that were coming out this year and that I felt would be, of interest to our community, of looking at themes of moving and transitions, because we know that that's, with everything else that's happening in the world right now, that there is a lot more instability around housing than there might have been before. So it's one that I think our kids will be encountering a little bit more and might need a little more support from books to sort of navigate. My choice for the older kids is Isaiah Dunn Is My Hero by Kelly J. Baptist. And this is about a 10-year-old boy named Isaiah. His dad has recently died. His mom has really been struggling since then with alcohol addiction. She's lost her job. They've lost their apartment. They're living in a motel. And Isaiah's goal is really, he wants to earn enough money to get them an apartment. So he's trying all these different things to try to earn money. And the thing that keeps him going when things feel rough is that his dad had a notebook full of stories that he wrote, and it was all about Isaiah Dunn as a superhero powered by beans and rice. And so it's a whole book of stories from his dad. He's slowly reading through the book, trying to read just enough stories to keep going, but knowing he's going to run out eventually. It is one that I did not have time to read all of it, but it's just really well written. It was built from it started as a short story in an anthology a few years ago that got expanded into a novel. And it's just, it's all told sort of in journal entries from Isaiah's point of view. And so it's a really kind of close personal perspective of what he's going through and how he's trying to be strong and help support his mom and his sister in this really tough time. All right, Lisa, any questions? Or are we still doing okay?
Still okay.
Perfect. All right, next up is language. And this is one of the ones where the clickable links actually work super well. We do have a system in place locally that anything that comes in that's in a language other than English gets tagged with very specific terms. So if you just click, Spanish language materials or bilingual books, that'll take you to everything we have. It's super comprehensive. Because Spanish is the language most spoken, after English, Spanish is the most commonly spoken language in Oregon City. So we have the largest Spanish collection in terms of our non-English materials at Oregon City. We have kids, teens, and adult things in Spanish, and then a small collection of bilingual picture books and easy readers as well. We also have a small Russian language collection at Oregon City and a handful of Braille materials. But we also can get books delivered from anywhere in Clackamas County, and Happy Valley has a really awesome international languages collection. And so they have a good selection of Chinese, Vietnamese, Ukrainian, and several other languages available. So if there's, just because we don't have it at Oregon City doesn't mean we can't get it. And if you just put in the name of the language and then language materials, it'll bring up a full list of everything that we have in the system in that language, which is really cool. As for my book suggestions, both of them they're available in Spanish and in English. My picture book is Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away by Meg Medina. And it's about two girls, Daniela and Evelyn, and they live in identical apartments and they play together every day. And so this story is, Evelyn inviting Daniela over to play, except it's the day that her family is moving. And so it's their last time playing together before they have to say goodbye. And Meg Medina is just a wonderful author. She's won the Corbel Prey Award multiple times for her writing, which is an award for essentially for the, I think it's official. The official description is the best depiction of the Latino or Latina or Latinx experience in America. And again, as I said earlier, like, you know, moving and change and housing insecurity is kind of a theme that kept coming up in the books that I was choosing from this year, because it is, unfortunately, it's a thing that we're experiencing this year in higher numbers than we might have in the past. But it's a really lovely tribute to friendship and maintaining friendship even throughout changes. And then my choice for older readers is Mañana Land by Pam Munoz Ryan. And this is, it's almost magical realism. It's set in a country called Santa Maria, and it is somewhere in the Americas. So it's a fictionalized Latin American country. And there's this big crumbling tower and this big crumbling wall sort of along the border between their country and this other country. And the main character, Max, his grandfather tells him all these fantastical, magical stories about people called guardians, who help refugees who are fleeing an authoritarian regime on the other side of the border, helps them kind of escape. And as far as Max is concerned, it's all fairy tales until he is trying out for the village football team and discovers you have to have a birth certificate in order to play. And he goes searching for his birth certificate, can't find one, and in the process discovers that his grandfather's fantastical stories are true, that he is a guardian, and that he finds a refugee girl who needs help escaping. And so it's this kind of magical realism, half realistic, half fantasy story, kind of dealing with concepts of immigration and being a refugee, but from this very, very different perspective that we generally don't see in some of these narratives. And for those of you who are familiar with, you may be familiar with Pam Munoz Ryan from Esperanza Rising, which was a Newbery Award book, I think in 1998, 1999. So she is just a powerhouse in the world of children's literature. So it's really beautifully written as well. All right, any other questions? Are we still doing okay?
All good.
Beautiful. All right, next up we have, I kind of have race and ethnicity broken down into a few different categories. This is one where I had several terms I could choose from. Some people are still using Native American, some people use American Indian, some Indigenous. Well, I feel like right now Indigenous is probably the term most commonly used colloquially. I did go with the Library Association terminology. So the American Indian Library Association every other year does an American Indian Youth Literature Award. And I want to draw your attention to, in the pink box, American Indians in Children's Literature by Debbie Reese. This is a website that is just a fantastic resource. It's full of reviews of children's books featuring Indigenous protagonists, but Debbie also has a ton of resources on how to evaluate books about American Indian culture, and just tons of articles. She is, I'm also thoroughly biased on this subject. She was a professor at the University of Illinois for many, many years. She was one of the community activists who was eventually successful in removing Indigenous stereotype mascot from the university. And I got to hear her speak and present and lecture on several occasions. And she is just, her site is not just full of book reviews, it's full of all sorts of tools for thinking, learning more about Indigenous cultures in North America and thinking differently about them and having a more critical eye on how they're presented in literature. So she is just a fantastic resource. Cannot say enough good things about her. This is one where we're working on changing our clickable subject link to Indigenous peoples. We found a workaround for that. It's still in process. So hopefully next year when I do this presentation, we'll be able to have some more updated terminology for that clickable link. I also like to use this slide as a time to point out that this is something that I did not realize until fairly recently, but and something I learned thanks to Debbie Reese, is that Federally recognized tribes are actually sovereign nations. And so anyone who is tribally enrolled has dual citizenship status. There are over 570 federally recognized tribes in the United States. So while it's good for our purposes here, Native American or American Indian or Indigenous is fairly generic. And so if you're looking at a book, it's really important to be looking at the to make sure that either the author or the author notes somewhere in there they're referencing a specific tribe, not not just this is a Native American folktale, but for example this is an Anishinaabe folk story that is told and things like that. So just something to be paying attention to when you are evaluating books about Indigenous cultures. So my choice for the picture book is We Are Water Protectors by Carol Lindstrom, which I totally picked before it won the Caldecott Medal for Best Illustrations of 2020, which is well-deserved. They are stunning. It's a book about water, all illustrated in watercolors by an Indigenous artist that is phenomenal. And it is inspired by the Standing Rock water protectors who have protested the Dakota Access Pipeline. But it's also an ode to Indigenous people throughout the world who are standing up for the environment and protecting our natural resources and the Indigenous values, and that activism is grounded in. The waiting list on this one is really long right now, but don't worry, I've ordered extra copies, so hopefully if you're interested in this one, we should be able to get it to you pretty quickly. It actually sold, like it was out of print. Every copy in existence was sold out within a couple of days of winning the Caldecott Medal. It's been a bit bonkers. So my choice for the upper elementary grades is a nonfiction book. And I will be totally honest, partly I'm sure there were fiction books, but I could not find any this year for this age group written by Indigenous authors, which was really unfortunate. But Powwow, A Celebration Through Song and Dance by Karen Pheasant Naganagwane is amazing. It's a book about powwow culture that talks about the history of sort of how powwow culture came to be, which is the suppression of traditional Indigenous cultural practices as part of colonization, and how those songs and dances survived and eventually became transformed into powwow as a modern form of preserving and passing on and celebrating Indigenous culture. So the book has a historical component, but then it also does a really great overview of like, what is a powwow actually like? What are the order of events? What types of dances are done? What clothing do people wear for the different dances? What types of foods are eaten? All of this other stuff that kind of walks you through both the history of powwow and then what things happen at a modern powwow and sort of what they are and what they're done. And it's a great overview and a great introduction. It is full of stunning, amazing photos. The author has been a powwow dancer for decades and has raised her children as powwow dancers, and they've traveled all over the world to dance. And so it's just full of just all sorts of incredible photos. I really wish that there was a way to turn this book into a documentary because it would be so good on video too. So that's one. I think I'm actually going to take that one home and read it cover to cover because I just want all the details about everything. Okay, still doing good on questions?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Next up, I have Asian Pacific Islander. This is one where there's a lot of debate about whether we should kind of be more precise in how we're talking about identifying these books as own voices books, whether we group them together. In this case, because there's the Asian Pacific American Library Association who gives out a book award, I put them together to reflect that award. And then we do try to make sure when we're doing these lists that we are highlighting and including, like being specific about including Pacific Islander culture as well. This is another one with the clickable subject link where you have a broad category that will bring up a lot of results, but there may just be a specific category instead. So you can always look for specific ethnicities because a book about Chinese Americans might only have that tag, not Asian Americans as well. My choice for the picture book for this one is Cannonball by Sasha Cotter. And it is a story from New Zealand about a boy who is Maori. And in that culture, there's a lot of diving there's some very specific cultural practices around diving and diving competitions. And so it's about a young child who's trying to perfect their cannonball as part of this sort of village diving practice. And they're having a little bit of trouble getting to the edge of the board and then actually getting the courage to jump off. And so they ask all the other divers in their community for advice, and they try all of the advice and it really doesn't work, and they belly flop. And so the child goes to their grandmother, and their grandmother says, listen to yourself, trust your own intuition, and you'll know what to do. And so the child finds the right outfit, the right saying, and the confidence to go off the diving board and just nail that cannonball. The illustrations are just really lovely and vibrant. Again, it's one of those books that works really well on multiple levels. It's a fantastic mirror for this very culturally specific kind of tradition around diving and cannonballs in particular. But it's also something that a lot of kids have experience with, of jumping off a diving board at a pool in pre-COVID times. And also that lesson of learning to listen to yourself and trust yourself is a lesson that, as an adult, I am still struggling to learn. And I wish I had a way to, access that as a kid. And I think it's a thing that all kids could benefit from learning to do a little bit more. The one downside to this book is that it's billed as an own voices book. There's a little bit of, and there's some definitions of some of the Maori terms, but I couldn't find a lot of cultural information in the book, and Googling was a little spotty. So if you're trying to do some more cultural connections to, history or geography of New Zealand and Maori communities in particular, you may have to do a little digging. For my upper elementary readers, I picked Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park. I am super excited about recommending this one. It is historical fiction that takes place in Dakota Territory in 1880, which is the same time and place as the many of the books in the Little House on the Prairie series. And it's about a girl named Hannah who is half Chinese and half white. And after years of traveling, she and her father are finally going to settle in this town in South Dakota. And she is so excited because it means she's going to get to go to school, and she might get to pursue her dream of training to become a dressmaker. And so this town has a lot of possibility. But the white settlers in the town, there's a lot of xenophobia towards Hannah and towards Hannah in particular, because her mother was Chinese. And there's also quite a bit of xenophobia towards the Indigenous people in the area as well. And this is an example of a really excellent author's note, because Linda Sue Park talks in detail about the research she did and the choices she made. But as an immigrant from Korea, as a little girl, she fell in love with the Little House books and had these just elaborate daydreams about how sort of writing her own fan fiction about how she could participate, be friends with Laura and live in this world. And then as she became an adult, she kind of saw the book through new eyes and realized, wow, this book is full of really, some of the characters say really horrible and negative things about Indigenous people. There's a couple scenes with blackface. And so this book is sort of a labor of love from her, of trying to reconcile all the things that she loved about Little House on the Prairie, while also kind of addressing some of the other things in those books that today we would look at and go, that is not how we treat other human beings. Which, there are many things about the Little House books that people really love. They have been, popular for almost 100 years, and generations keep finding them because there are really wonderful things in them. But as times change, there are things in those books that are really not necessarily things that we necessarily want to pass on to our children. And so this book is a great, I think, particularly for anyone who loves the Little House books, this is a great supplement that takes so many of the wonderful things about them, but also explores some of the things that are maybe things that we want to rethink and do differently in the future. So, Lisa, any questions? Are we still doing okay?
Still good.
Perfect. All right. Next up is books with Black protagonists. This is one where the clickable subject heading is pretty straightforward. My choice for our younger readers, kindergarten through second grade, is Nana Akua Goes to School by Trisha Elam Walker. And the illustrations are by April Harrison, who is really wonderful, and I highlighted her last year too. And it's about a little girl who, it's grandparents' day at school, and she is bringing her beloved Nana Akua, but she is really a little bit nervous because her Nana is from Ghana and has traditional markings on her face. And she's worried that her classmates are going to laugh or say something mean to her grandmother. And so she and her grandmother talk it through. They decide what they're going to do. They get this beautiful quilt that Nana Akua has made that has all of the traditional Adrinka West African symbols. And they bring the quilt to school and they use it to explain the markings on Nana Akua's face and these traditional symbols that are part of West African culture. And then every child gets to pick a symbol and Nana will paint it on their face. And it's really well told. The illustrations are stunning, and it's a really great introduction to a piece of West African culture in particular that you know, many readers in the United States will not be very familiar with. And that's that those cultural practices have been integrated into American Black culture more generally too. So my choice for upper elementary readers is Ways to Make Sunshine by Renee Watson, who does not live in Oregon currently, but she was born and raised in Portland. And this one is not just an Oregon book. This is like super local. This book is set in Lake Oswego, so not that far away. And it's sort of billed as an updated Ramona Quimby with a Black protagonist. And so you have Ryan Hart is our main character. And the book is sort of told in a bunch of little short story vignette things very similar in form to Visas and Ramona by Beverly Cleary. Ryan is in 4th grade. She's very spunky, she's very spirited. She's got that Ramona spark to her. And her dad has lost his job. They are moving to, so they're gonna have to move. He's got a new job, but it pays less. So she gets to stay at her school, but they're moving to a different house and things are kind of changing. And so it's all a bunch of stories about what happens to Ryan during that year. Her name means king, and she's always really trying to, live up to her name. Her father is always saying, be who we named you to be. So she's trying to be a leader, trying to make, help people and make, spread joy and love, but she doesn't always get it quite right. And it's just really warm and funny. It's got tons of super local details, and it also does a really good job of also not shying away from, what it's like to be a young Black girl living in a community that is, as white as Lake Oswego. And there's actually a really fantastic documentary called Black Girl in Suburbia about made by a filmmaker who grew up in Westland. So there's also a documentary for slightly older viewers that kind of touches on that same subject as well. And then last up in the race and ethnicity category is Latinx. This is another one where we've got a general term that will bring up most of the results, but you can also look more specifically by ethnicity for, Cuban Americans, Mexican Americans to bring up some additional results, because you won't always have both terms. You'll sometimes have one or the other. So my picture book choice is Federico and the Wolf by Rebecca J. Gomez. And this is one that I put on here. It's, as you might guess, a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. And one of the reasons that I went with this one is we put it in one of our grab bags for the library. And I actually, while I was greeting people and walking them through our pickup system, I had a grandmother come to talk to me specifically about how much she loved this book and how fun she thought it was for her granddaughter. So it's one that I know has a lot of appeal, just broad appeal. It was one that someone liked so much they had to come tell me about how great that book was. So I know it's always a winner when that happens. So Federico has to go get pico de gallo ingredients for his abuelo so that they can make pico de gallo. And the wolf catches him along, or finds him along the way. And so it's retelling the basics of the Little Red Riding Hood story. So it's a fractured fairy tale, which are always fun, but it's got tons of culturally specific details and some Spanish words mixed in. And it's got really lovely, colorful illustrations. And it's just a great one to do that. Again, kind of checks a lot of boxes and being a window and a mirror. And then my choice for the older readers is The Way to Rio Luna by Zoraida Cordova, who is an Ecuadorian-born author. I believe she wrote the book, one of her books, I think Brullas, turned into a Netflix series maybe. I might be mixing that up with something else. I'm trying to remember from the author bio that I read. But this is about a boy named Danny Monteverde, who he and his sister Pili have grown up in foster care. And Pili has this book called The Way to Rio Luna. It's an old book she got at a yard sale that's now out of print. And it's a book full of fairy tales, and it's all about it's got a map to this magical land. And Pili is always saying, we're going to go get to Rio Luna and everything's going to be better. And then Danny and Peely get separated. Danny goes to a foster family. Peely stays in the group home, and Peely disappears. And everyone has said that she has just run away, and no one wants to look for her. But Danny knows that she's gone to Rio Luna. And he finally finds a map to Rio Luna in an old library book. And he sets out to find her and goes on kind of this quest through Ecuador and Brazil, trying to track down this magic land that it's got a whole mixture of the fairy tales in it are original, and they're kind of a mixture of fairy tales from all sorts of global traditions. And it's this big, sort of epic fantasy globe-trotting adventure. All right. I do include a couple of categories around religion, particularly for religions that also have a really strong cultural component. So we do have Jewish books on here as well.
Sarah,
yes.
Before you go too far, sorry.
Yeah.
What was the name of the documentary that you mentioned?
Oh, yes, it's called Black Girl in Suburbia. And I cannot remember the name of the filmmaker, but we showed it at the library a couple of years ago and did a panel discussion with the filmmaker and a couple of people locally. And it was, the feedback from the people who saw it said it was really good and really powerful. So highly recommend it. Okay, sorry, any other questions?
I do have a question here about A Little House, but I think it might be better if we just wait till the end to kind of broach on the topic of.
Yes, definitely. And I will say that the Little House books, it's a whole can of worms. And if people have questions, I'm happy. Well, we can definitely talk about it at the end, but that one is a bigger question to have, a bigger conversation to have for sure.
And then is Black Girl in Suburbia free? Do you know?
I do not know, but I can, when we get to the Q&A session, I can do a quick Google search and check. So remind me to double check on that and see where we can find it. All right, any other questions?
I think we're good now.
Perfect. All right, cool. So I'll dive right back in with my picture book choice. I have The Generous Fish by Jacqueline Jules that's based on a couple of different Jewish folk tales. It's about a boy named Reuben who finds a fish with golden scales in the ocean outside the village where he lives, and he becomes friends with the fish, and they play together every day until one day one of the fish's scales falls off, and the scale is real gold, and the fish says, "Oh yeah, you can take this." But the villagers find out, and suddenly they all want the fish's scales, and the fish is really generous and says, "Sure, you can have a scale, it'll grow back," but people are taking the scales too fast, and pretty soon the fish has no scales left and is really sick, and Reuben has to step in and defend his friend, and the village has to kind of come together and help heal the fish after they have taken his scales from him. So it's great. It's got some very culturally specific components, but it also has sort of an environmental, resource conservation message that I think a lot of us are really trying to, that's a topic a lot of us are trying to engage with right now. It also has a really interesting parallel to Rainbow Fish, which I know is a book that is very popular with elementary educators, or at least it used to be. I assume it still is based on how often it's checked out. And so this is a nice book to read alongside Rainbow Fish and kind of add it's a nice sort of compare and contrast book that can supplement some of those lessons around Rainbow Fish. And then my upper elementary choice is No Vacancy by Zipporah Cohen. And this is a book about Miriam, who's lived in New York City her whole life, but her dad loses his job and they buy a motel in upstate New York in a town that is mostly Catholic. And so Miriam is kind of struggling to fit in, and she's also trying to find ways to help the motel succeed. And so she and her new friend Kate, who's Catholic, they end up faking an apparition of the Virgin Mary to bring in extra business. Miriam really kind of finds herself sort of struggling with her identity and how to be herself in this community where she doesn't fit in the way that she is used to or would like to. This is one where I actually had some trouble this year finding just a contemporary fiction book about a Jewish kid that was not, historical fiction about the Holocaust. So I always do like to point out that, sometimes with Jewish books, it can tend to get pretty heavy on the books about the Holocaust end of the spectrum, and not that it's important for us to be aware of what happened and, it's not that I'm saying we shouldn't have Holocaust books, but if that's the only experience you ever have with books about your identity, like that's really limited. So I always like to make a point of saying I try to do a lot of contemporary fiction here. So to kind of promote books that are reflecting kids' lives and not necessarily dealing on like only providing kids with books that are only dealing with a particular historical reality that is, you know, very traumatic. I also like to do for this presentation some books about Muslim kids. We have a couple different ways you can find them in the catalog, both Muslim and Islam will bring up results. I also want to make sure that this is something, as you're looking for books, just keep in mind that in North America, we tend to sort of conflate the Arab experience and the Muslim experience as being the same thing. But there are Muslim countries throughout Asia and Africa as well, and there are plenty of other religions that are practiced in the Middle East and countries that we would kind of consider more Arab countries. So it's just good to know that those are that you can have books about Muslims who are not Arabs and Arabs who are not Muslims, and that it's a little bit more complex than we sometimes might expect, just because of the way that that the media in North America tends to talk about this. So my choice for elementary, or sorry, not elementary, kinder through second graders is Salma the Syrian Chef by Danny Ramadan. And that is, it's about Salma and her mother have immigrated from Syria. Their dad has not joined them in Canada yet. And her mother is really having a hard time. Mama doesn't smile anymore. And so Salma thinks about what makes her mother happy and realizes, oh, we haven't really eaten Syrian food. She loves this dish called ful shami or ful shami. And so Salma doesn't know how to make it, but with help from everybody else at the refugee center or the Welcome Center for Refugees, where she's going to learn English, she finds the recipe and figures out how to cook the dish for her mother and give her mother a taste of home. So that's a good one. On a variety of levels, I always like to include food stories as at least one of my books, picture books, just because food is one of those things that can be a good window and a good mirror where you can do a lot with, you know, food is really culturally and emotionally meaningful to people. So you can reflect foods that kids might eat at home and have a special connection to the food in the book, but then have kids think more broadly about, well, you know, this is a food I might not have tried, but what food would I make for my mother to cheer her up? Or what food does my grandmother, you know, always make for our family? So it's got a lot of different points of connection. And then my choice for older readers is Planet Omar, Accidental Trouble Magnet by Zainab Mian. And this is a book from the UK. And it's about Omar, who's the middle child in a Muslim family. His parents are both scientists. His mom just got her dream job, which, as Omar points out, if that's all adults have to dream about, I don't know that I want to grow up because my dreams are much better than that. But they do have to move to a new town. And with it comes all the regular things that come with moving to a new place and making new friends, but also dealing with Islamophobia and prejudice. And the book is written diary of a wimpy kid style, so writing and a mixture of writing and illustrations. It's super funny, and it's got plenty of cultural details about, you know, growing up in a Muslim family, both just like the neutral everyday stuff and again some of the challenges too. But I've read the introduction to the first couple chapters of this a few times, and it's really like silly and funny, and I think it's one that a lot of kids will relate to on many levels. Then the last section I want to talk about is intersectionality, which I've referred to a couple times earlier. Some of you may be familiar with this term, some of you may not. Dr. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw coined the term in 1989, and her definition is that intersectionality is the study of overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. And then she goes on to give some examples. But basically what it means is nobody is ever one thing, that you cannot boil a person down to one aspect of their identity, that we are all many things at the same time, and that those things all come together in ways that are both unique to the individual, but also sort of specific to those different aspects of our identity. So I always like to make sure that people are familiar with this concept, and to also kind of, some of the other lists tend to, I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole just trying to put everybody into one singular box, but to acknowledge that people and identities are complex, and to have books that reflect that as well. So my choice for the picture book is Accordionly by Michael Genhart. And this is one that's based on the author's own experiences. So it's a book about a little boy who has two grandpas. Abuelo is Mexican and only speaks Spanish, and Opa is Swiss and only speaks German, but they both love to play the accordion. And so when the grandpas get together, they don't speak each other's language, and so they really have trouble connecting. And it's a story of how the little boy gets them to use their accordions to connect and to have something that they share all together as a family. And there are some different accordion songs that are linked that you can then go like look up and hear what hear what a polka accordion sounds like versus what a mariachi accordion might sound like. And there's a good author's note, and both the author and the illustrator are both have cultural ties to both Mexican and like Swiss German communities. So it's a fun one. And it's always good to have a music tie-in when you can. And then my choice for older readers is Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. And it's set in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with an Afro-Latina protagonist named Lucely. And in Lucely's family, when you die, if you're a good person, you become a firefly, and then your spirit continues to live in the family home and share the family meals and be part of family life. And Halloween is coming up. Her dad's ghost tour business is struggling. So she and her best friend cast this spell that's supposed to help. And it ends up actually summoning a whole bunch of bad spirits that put all of Fort Lauderdale and Lucely's firefly spirits in danger. And so she and her best friend have to get help from her friend's witchy grandmother and kind of team up together to save the town and protect Lucely's ancestral spirits from the bad spirits that they accidentally summoned. I think it was, how is it described? That one of the reviews made a Ghostbusters reference to it. So I think based on that, it will be a very good time. And it's a little bit spooky too, but with a slightly different flavor than you would see in, say, Goosebumps. So that brings us almost to the end. I have a couple of this section. I have a couple of additional resources I want to mention, and then I know that we probably want to take a break in the middle. I feel like now might be a good time to get up and do a little stretching and then come back for the last section and Q&A. So I'll do the resources and then we'll take a quick break. Lisa, does that sound good?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So a couple of other websites that might be helpful to you. I promised at the beginning that I would give you information about how to find more on statistics on diverse books in the publishing industry. The Cooperative Children's Book Center, or CCBC, has been keeping statistics going back to 1995. If you're curious about this, if you're a numbers nerd like me, definitely reach out. The statistics that are available have some really good information, and some of the public stat tables are a little bit ambiguous. So it's if you're interested in doing more research, let's definitely talk just before you dive in, so you can kind of have a little bit more information. I also like to mention We Need Diverse Books. It's a nonprofit that they've done several things over the year, five years or so since they've been formed. Right now, they're focusing more on supporting authors and aspiring authors. But I mention them here because their Twitter feed is excellent. I generally don't do Twitter, but I do check it periodically. So even if you're not on Twitter, you can still get the information. They do tons of book recommendations. They tweet and retweet all sorts of own voices books. So if you're looking for book recommendations, either follow them on Twitter or check in periodically, because it is just like a constant flow of really excellent suggestions. And then the last one I want to recommend is Diverse Book Finder. It is a database of over 2,000 diverse picture books that you can search or browse by identity. So if you know what you're looking for, it's much more precise than those subject terms I gave you before. It's a separate service, so anything you find there, you'll then have to go back to the library catalog to search. But if you're looking for picture books, they have a ton of resources there that are a little bit more user-friendly than the library system. We have just a short overview of library resources coming up next, and then we'll have time for our Q&A at the end. So I'm going to go ahead, jump on in, keep going. I'm just going to go over some of the basics of how to find books at the library. I tried to link as many things as possible from the presentation And in the book list, you don't have to do quite as much searching, but I also like to make sure you have the basic information. My number one tip for searching in the library catalog, which is at lincc.org, is that some people like to get ambitious and there's a little drop down that will allow you to choose subject or author or title. That is a sneaky little feature. Our system is really good at being precise and not very good at recognizing mistakes. So if you don't have your thing typed exactly the same way that the system reads it as, if you choose, author or subject, you might not get any results, even though the book that you're looking for is there. So I always say, like, one of my number one tips, just leave it at all fields, because that will be the most likely to bring up what you're looking for. The more precise ones, if you're off by like a space bar or a space or a period or a hyphen, sometimes things can get wonky. Another question I get a lot is people will do their search and then they'll be like, great, well, how do I know if you have the book? So once you'll get a list of search options. Once you find the one that you're looking for, you click on the title, which is in blue, and that will actually take you to that additional information. Once you're in, you can scroll down to the bottom of the page and it will tell you what library has the book and whether it's checked out. I also like to point out the subject terms that are anything, just like in our presentation, anything in the library's catalog that's in blue is a clickable link. And so you can also click that link. If you find a book that you like and you want more books that are similar, one of the things you can do is click on those links and find more books that are tagged with that same term. If you find something that you want, you can place it on hold instead to have it pulled for you so you can pick it up. You'll put in your library card number and password, choose your pickup library, and then click place hold. You can pick your books up at any book or any library in Clackamas County. We have 13 branches from Malala to Sandy. So if there's another library that's easier for you to get to within Clackamas County, you can always pick up the books there if coming to Oregon City is not the best option for you. We have a really sneaky feature built in at the bottom of that page. If you scroll all the way down and click reading recommendations and reviews, we have a little built-in tool that will give you recommend additional books that are similar, and you can click on the cover and go right to them to place them on hold. This is from a feature from a database we use called Novelist. That's a little bit more extensive, but this is the quick, easy, user-friendly way of doing it. The titles are chosen by librarians. I describe it as, I used to describe it as Pandora for books. But now it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more like Spotify personalized playlists. It's the metaphor that works a little better these days. If you do choose subject heading, this has to be super precise. It's those blue highlighted links I included in the PowerPoint. So if you do choose that option, make sure it's typed exactly like what you found. So if it's in the PowerPoint presentation, just click the link, or if it's in, you click on a book title and it's listed there along with the rest of the information. Best option is to just click that link directly or copy paste. Don't try to type it in yourself because it's a little bit finicky. And then the other really useful tool to know is that sometimes you'll do a general search. Maybe you will look for books about immigrants and you'll get 1,000 results and you're like, oh my gosh, this is too many books to look at. There's a whole bunch of little blue boxes along the, or little a list of things in blue along the side that you can check or click on, and that will allow you to limit. So if you just want to see what Oregon City Library has, you can do that. If you just want to see books or just want to see DVDs, you can do that. You can narrow the list down, fiction versus nonfiction, subjects, age range, very, very broad age range, language. And that will narrow your search down until, you can go from 1,000 to maybe 50 or 100 books that are, nonfiction for children on the shelf at Oregon City that have the criteria you're looking for. So this is a nice way to, again, narrow things down and keep the results from being a little too overwhelming if you get more than you were hoping for. One of the few upsides to the COVID times is that we have been able to make a bunch of instructional videos. So most of the stuff that I just went over really quickly, we have a video for. It's at the library YouTube channel. It's called Library Hacks Playlist. I have a link here. We talk about how to place a hold, how to search, how to browse for new books, how to use that little book recommendation tool, a ton of stuff. We also have videos on some things like, you know, getting a library e-card and picking up holds and things like that. So definitely check Library Hacks if you have questions, because you might be able to answer your questions in 3 minutes before you call or email. And that's usually nicer than ending up, you know, maybe on hold if someone is going out to check the book drop or leaving a voicemail or whatever the case may be. I also just want to talk a little bit about the services that we have available during the COVID times. If you do not have a Clackamas County library card already, you can definitely get one. If you live within the county, you can apply for an e-card online, and you can use that for ebooks, digital audiobooks, and our other online resources. If you don't live in Clackamas County, you can still get a library card, and you can still get a full general access card to check out physical books. But we have to do an address verification for that. So if you need either of those options for a library card, send an email to our circulation department or give our main number a call, and somebody will get you set up. I saw as I was looking at registrations for the session that I recognized some names and some faces from the pre-COVID times. I just wanted to let you guys know, if you had an educator card last school year, it carried over. We just extended it a year to this school year. So if you are an educator who had a card last year, it's all that has been extended in particular. And if you live locally and just have your regular library card, that's all operating fine as well. So again, we've got a couple different options. And if you have any questions about a card, definitely email Circ or call the main number, because I have many skills and much knowledge, but this is not one of them. So you'll get a faster answer if you go directly to them. I also wanted to do a quick overview of what we are, some of our other things that services we are offering that you can access with your card. Everything we have for K-12 students is, we have one page that has everything, how to get a card, events, different types of ebook apps that you can use. Basically all the free stuff that we're doing that can be accessed virtually is all linked from that page. That is your landing page for the bulk of what you will probably need. A couple of highlights. We have ebooks and digital audiobooks. Those are available 24/7 from one of several different apps that we use. Physical books, you can still check them out. We have no contact pickups happening. So what you do is you'll place a hold. When it comes in, you'll get an email asking you to schedule an appointment, and then you can come in and pick up those books. We have 10-minute appointment times Monday through Friday, and you just come in, grab your stuff and go. Quick, easy. It requires a little bit more planning time, but we've been able to get a lot of people through the building while still maintaining our safety protocols, because we have a fairly small square footage we're working with. We can't have very many people in the building, so we have to be strategic about it. And then I also always like to mention, check with your school library. Your school library has tons of resources. So definitely talk to your media assistant. Every single book I shared in this presentation, or at least I think every single book, Doug, the district librarian, has ordered for all of the buildings. So all of the books that I shared, you can get at the public library, or you can get at the school library. Plus your school libraries have a bunch of additional resources that the public library doesn't necessarily have. So I always like to make sure when I do these presentations that you guys know to talk to your media assistant, because they can help you out as well. All right, that brings me to the end of my overall presentation. So